Nathan Cole hadn't spoken to her in 11 months, and he still had one voicemail saved on his phone, 14 seconds long. Her voice, ordinary, telling him she'd be 5 minutes late. He played it in his truck before work. He played it at red lights. He played it at 2 in the morning, when the house went quiet and the loneliness got loud. A grown man, 38 years old, replaying 14 seconds of a woman who had walked out the door and never looked back. Let me ask you something, and answer it honestly before you keep watching. Why do you still think about that person every single day? Why, knowing exactly how much they hurt you, does a part of you still miss them? Why does your phone lighting up still send a small electric jolt through your chest, that quiet hope that maybe, this time, it's them? Stop lying to yourself for a moment. You don't miss the person. You miss the version of them you built in your own head. You miss the illusion. You miss the story you told yourself about who they could become and who you would finally get to be beside them. Carl Jung wrote that whatever we refuse to face inside ourselves will meet us on the outside as fate. Nathan wasn't grieving a woman. He was standing in front of a mirror he had spent his whole life avoiding. This is not a comfortable video, and I won't pretend it is. There will be no soft advice about time healing everything, no reminders to love yourself and light a candle. The truth in here is going to poke at wounds you've kept covered for years. But that same truth is the only thing that will ever actually set you free. Because what we so often call love is a wound wearing a wedding dress. It's the deepest part of you, clinging to whoever agreed to feed your hunger, even when that person was slowly starving you. Today, on Mindset Stamps, we are placing the stamp of self-liberation on your mental framework. And here is the question that changes everything. What if the anxiety you feel every time you're ignored, every time you're left on red, every time you're rejected, has almost nothing to do with them, and almost everything to do with what you have never found inside yourself? Are you ready to find out? If you are, let's begin. The mirror you never wanted to look into. Have you ever stopped to ask why you feel so bonded to someone who is clearly no good for you? You see the manipulation. You feel the disrespect. You recognize the pattern. And still, some part of you begs for one more chance, one more message, one more crumb. The answer to that isn't hiding in them. It's buried in you, deeper than you'd like to admit. Carl Jung refused to see relationships as simple social arrangements. To him, every emotional bond becomes a mirror of the unconscious. When we fall for someone, we rarely see the actual human being in front of us. Instead, we cast onto them the pieces of ourselves we've never met, or the pieces we were shamed into hiding long ago. Jung called this psychic projection. You aren't attached to who they are. You're attached to what they represent inside your private inner world. They came to carry, without either of you knowing it, what Jung named the anima and the animus, the deep inner images of the feminine and the masculine that live inside every one of us. Those figures point to what feels missing in us, the thing we chase to feel whole. Once we hang that image on a real person, the illusion becomes so vivid that we mistake dependence for completeness and mistake submission for devotion. Then the trouble arrives. Admiration curdles into obsession the moment the real person fails to match the perfect image we painted. That's when we begin to disappear. We take the crumbs. We defend the person who wounds us. We betray our own instincts, all in the name of a love that, in truth, only ever lived in our imagination. What felt like love was emotional hunger wearing an unconscious costume. Nathan realized this on a Tuesday, sitting across from an old friend who finally said it plainly. You never loved her, brother. You loved not being alone with yourself. It landed like a slap. And as long as you keep searching out there for what is missing in here, you will stay a prisoner of another person's attention, a hostage to unanswered texts, a beggar for scraps of validation that never fill you. Think about it! Jung warned that until you integrate these hidden parts of yourself, you'll keep falling into the same trap, repeating the same cycle, choosing the same wounded person wearing a different face. That's not bad luck. That's unconscious destiny. So how do you walk out of that prison? How do you stop living to satisfy everyone else and finally come home to yourself? That's exactly where we're headed. But first, do this with me. Drop this affirmation in the comments so it becomes real for you today. The mask that ate the man. You learned the lesson far too young. You learned that to be loved, you first had to be useful. You had to be good, pleasant, easy to be around, desirable enough to earn a seat at the table. So you built a mask, carefully, patiently, one expression at a time, until it fit the desires of the people whose approval you needed to survive. Carl Jung called that mask the persona, the character we assemble to move through the social world. It has its uses. The danger begins when we forget we're wearing it, when we start believing the mask is the whole of who we are. Slowly, the real self underneath begins to suffocate. This is the quiet machinery running underneath almost every dependent relationship on Earth. If this content is making sense to you so far, take a second and click subscribe to Mindset Stamps. It genuinely helps the channel, and it keeps videos like this one coming to you. Thank you for your support. So there was a woman in Nathan's town, a nurse named Claire Bennett, who smiled at everyone and cried in her car. For 9 years she dimmed her own light, so her husband's insecurity would never feel threatened. She swallowed her opinions at dinner. She said, "I'm fine," so many times the words stopped meaning anything, and every year she drifted a little further from the person she'd been at 22, until one morning she looked in the bathroom mirror and genuinely did not recognize the eyes looking back. That's what the mask costs. Every time you shrink to keep someone comfortable, you move another inch away from your true self. And the cruel part is that the outside approval you're chasing never satisfies. It can't. No matter how many times someone tells you you're amazing, if you feel like you're living a lie, the emptiness stays. Feeding real hunger with someone else's compliments is like trying to fill your stomach with air. Here is the part almost nobody understands. The hollow feeling eating at you was never longing for that person. It was longing for yourself, for the parts of you that got abandoned so you could be accepted, for the freedom to simply exist without the terror of being left. As long as you need another human being to tell you who you are, every absence becomes a small death, every silence becomes proof of rejection, every criticism reopens the same old wound. That is where the anxiety is born. The tightness in the chest, the sleepless nights, the obsessive checking of the phone, the endless emotional surveillance of another person's mood. Because deep down, what terrifies you isn't losing them. It's being left alone with yourself and realizing you no longer know who that is. Friedrich Nietzsche put it with brutal clarity. You have your way, I have my way. As for the right way, the correct way, and the only way, it does not exist. You spent years trying to become someone else's correct way, and it nearly cost you your own. The alarm of the soul. You keep calling it anxiety. In reality, it's the muffled scream of every part of you that got forgotten, rejected, and cut away in the name of love. It's your soul trying to tell you something has gone badly wrong, that you've been living an emotional lie, and that the price of keeping this bond has become far too high. And the one paying that price is the truest version of you. Jung taught that the human psyche is layered, conscious and unconscious, and those layers need to sit in some kind of harmony. When you strangle who you really are to keep a relationship alive, that harmony shatters. What's left is a raw internal split, and that split announces itself as anxiety. It isn't only fear of abandonment, it's a silent civil war between what you truly feel and what you permit yourself to feel. Every time you choked back tears so you wouldn't be a burden, every time you said you were okay while quietly falling apart, you drove the two halves of yourself further apart. So the psyche sounds an alarm. Anxiety becomes your mind's desperate attempt to restore its own balance. Picture the battle honestly. On one side stands the false self, begging the world for acceptance. On the other stands the true self, gagged and pleading for permission to be real. There was a night Nathan drove 2 hours to a town he had no reason to visit, just because she'd once mentioned liking it. He sat in an empty parking lot at midnight, heart hammering, and finally asked himself out loud, "What am I actually chasing?" The chest tightness wasn't about her. His soul was sprinting from a life that had never belonged to him. And no reply, no reunion, no fresh promise ever quiets that alarm, because the problem was never the other person. The problem is the distance between you and your own essence. Let me ask you something honestly. How long have you treated the warning light on your dashboard as the enemy, when it was only ever trying to save your life? Jung believed this fragmentation isn't a dead end, it's an invitation, a call to turn inward, to listen to the anguish instead of drowning it out, and to reclaim the parts of yourself you abandoned somewhere along the road. I want to invite you to do something that will make this process real. In the comments, write down one truth about yourself that you have been too afraid to say out loud, one part of you that you buried just to be accepted by someone who never deserved that sacrifice. This is part of the journey, claiming your voice and declaring that you will no longer bend. The shadow chooses for you. You believe you consciously choose the people you let into your life. But what if the most hidden region of your mind has been making that choice for you all along? What if you never chose the pain at all and it was your shadow doing the choosing? That denied, buried, disowned part of you that still quietly runs the show from the basement of your mind. Carl Jung defined the shadow as everything you refuse to be but secretly are. Every impulse your parents, your church, your culture branded as wrong or shameful or ugly, and that you buried alive so the world would keep you. But burying something is not the same as killing it. Whatever you repress turns into psychic energy waiting for a stage to perform on. And do you know the shadow's favorite stage in the whole world? Your relationships. You are pulled toward whatever mirrors your shadow, which is why, without ever meaning to, you keep running the same script with new actors. New name, new face, identical pattern. You erase yourself, they wound you. You blame yourself, you beg for scraps and christen it love. That's not a run of bad luck, that's destiny, sculpted by your own inner darkness. Do you keep ending up with emotionally unavailable people? With narcissists, with the ones who make you feel small? Then ask yourself the harder question. What do these people reveal about what you refuse to see in yourself? Maybe you deny your own anger. Maybe you've buried your hunger to be seen, or your desire for a little control over your own life. So you surrender to someone who openly lives out everything you've forbidden in yourself. That's the shadow at work, projected onto another human being. You despise in them what you can't accept in yourself, and you worship in them what you long ago abandoned in yourself. Machiavelli once wrote that a leader must be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. Most people in toxic love are neither. They walk straight into the same trap again and again, and they've forgotten they ever had a roar. As Jung said, what you resist persists, and what you accept transforms. Now, before we go further, I want to be direct with you. If everything you're hearing is landing, you already know this channel isn't here for cheap comfort. So keep going. The next part is where the fight becomes real, because escaping a toxic person is only half the work. The other half is understanding why they attracted you in the first place, and that takes genuine courage. The courage to admit that some of the chaos came from inside you, from old wounds and unhealed traumas that need to be faced instead of buried. So how do you turn that shadow into strength? How do you finally break the cycle and rebuild the one relationship that outlasts every other, the one you have with yourself? Jung called that path individuation, and that's where we go next. The long walk back to yourself. There comes a moment when you simply cannot live divided anymore. You can't keep being two people, the polished version you show the world and the one screaming underneath. The exact instant the pain grows too large to fit inside you is the instant real healing begins. For Carl Jung, that's the doorway to individuation, the process by which a person stops being a puppet of their masks and their wounds and starts becoming who they actually are. Make no mistake though, this road is not gentle or pretty, it's a confrontation. You'll have to face every insecurity you've dodged, every trauma you've minimized, every self-destructive pattern you've excused. You'll have to admit that in more moments than you'd like, you were a willing participant in your own suffering, not because you wanted the pain, but because nobody ever taught you another way to live. For Nathan, individuation started with a single deleted voicemail. 14 seconds, gone. His thumb hovered over the button for almost a minute. Deleting it felt like a small death, and in a way it was, the death of a fantasy he'd been feeding for a year. Individuation begins the moment you stop chasing the people who refuse to see you and start looking at yourself with brutal, unflinching honesty. When you finally ask, why do I abandon myself so completely just to keep someone close? What am I trying to compensate for? Which piece of my soul do I hand over every time I beg to be loved? Those questions hurt. They're supposed to. They tear the veil off the illusion, and on the other side of them, you begin gathering up the lost fragments of yourself. Every boundary you set, every time you choose dignified silence over desperate begging, every time you say no instead of folding, you're quietly saying yes to your deepest self. You're walking away from the self that was built to please and building one that is whole, real, and free. And this is the most powerful turn of all. Once you reconnect with your own center, the other person stops being your rescue. You no longer require their approval to feel worthy. You no longer need affection handed to you to feel complete, because you've moved back into your own body, your own space, your own truth. Jung called this the realization of the self, the true core of who you are, free from the tyranny of the mask and the grip of the shadow. From that ground, you finally understand that your pain was never your identity. It was only ever one chapter of your story. Drop this affirmation in the comments right now and mean it as you type each word. I am no longer a hostage to anyone's silence, and I am reclaiming every part of me that I gave away to be loved. The anchor and the ocean. You made it this far for a reason. Somewhere inside, you already knew something had to change. Maybe you couldn't name the ache. Maybe you called it weakness, or neediness, or being too much. But now you understand it was the call of your own soul, a quiet voice telling you that you've endured too much, sacrificed too much, and wandered so far from yourself that the mirror barely feels familiar anymore. Letting go was never about forgetting. It isn't erasing the memories or pretending the wound never bled. It's understanding, accepting, and then releasing. It's recognizing that the person who hurt you belonged to one chapter and has no right to walk into the next pages of your life. Holding on to someone who destroys you is like trying to swim across an ocean with an anchor chained to your ankle. You will drown long before you ever reach the far shore. And I won't lie to you, letting go hurts. Cutting an invisible cord takes real strength, because you aren't only leaving a person behind, you're burying the fantasies, the idealized version, the future you rehearsed 1,000 times that will now never arrive. Yet that specific pain is sacred, because it's the pain of being reborn. It's the necessary grief that carries you back to yourself, so you can finally occupy the space that another person's absence used to rule. The Roman philosopher Seneca wrote, "Sometimes, even to live is an act of courage." Choosing yourself after years of self-abandonment is exactly that kind of courage. You no longer have to shrink to fit inside a cramped relationship. You no longer have to twist yourself into the expectations of people who never once saw your essence. Carl Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and that privilege is sitting in front of you right now. So this is the choice. Not changing them, not repairing the past, not rehearsing the argument you'll never get to win, just deciding, with the full weight of your soul, that from today you will live from your own truth, without masks, without chains, without repeating the patterns that only ever wounded you. Claire, the nurse, finally chose it. She left, rebuilt, and a year later she told a friend the strangest part was how quiet her chest felt. No alarm, no racing, just her own steady heartbeat for the first time in a decade. The stamp you carry out. So let me ask you the only question that matters now. What is the one thing you need to let go of to finally set yourself free? Write it in the comments and treat that space as a cutting ritual, a symbolic act of release. Write it as if you were speaking directly to your own heart, because that is exactly who you're talking to. If this message reached something real in you, if something inside you stirred while you were watching, don't stop here. You didn't make it to the end of a video like this out of simple curiosity. You made it here because something in you has already begun to change. So keep going. You are not lost, and you are not alone. You are simply a few steps ahead of the person you used to be, and that is frightening, but it is also the most freeing thing in the world. If this content is making sense to you, click subscribe and join the Mindset Stamps community, because the work of becoming whole is easier when you're not doing it alone. Thank you truly for your support. And here is your final challenge. Which stamp are you adding to your mindset today? The stamp of self-worth, the stamp of boundaries, or the stamp of letting go? Tell me in the comments. Stamp it, claim it, and carry it out of here with you. Because the moment you stop begging for love is the exact moment you finally begin to find yourself.